Welcome to the deep dive. So, next Tuesday, there's a big meeting happening in Washington.
Yeah, the Canadian Prime Minister heading down to meet the U.S. President.
Exactly. And it's not just, any old meeting. There's quite a bit of context swirling around.
Definitely. Some unusual rhetoric lately, that whole 51st state suggestion for Canada.
Right. Which is pretty out there, plus the usual trade pressures that seem to keep popping up.
So if you're tuning in, you probably want to get past the headlines, figure out what's really going on, what could happen.
That's the plan. For this deep dive, we want to zero in on the core issues. We'll look at what the Prime Minister actually said after his recent call with the President.
Yeah, try to give you some real clarity on what to expect from this pretty high-stakes meeting next week.
Okay, so basics first. The PM apparently described that phone call as very constructive.
He did. And, in diplomatic language, constructive usually signals things are, well, at least moving.
It's better than frank, I suppose.
Definitely. And the key thing is that call led directly to them agreeing to meet in person next Tuesday in Washington.
So pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah, which suggests, both sides see it as important, maybe urgent even.
And listening to the PM, it sounds like they've got sort of two main categories of things to discuss.
That's right. He laid out two main areas. First, what he called immediate trade pressures.
Okay, trade. What specifically?
Well, he mentioned sectoral issues. Think specific industries, like lumber or cars, where disagreements often flare up.
Right, those never seem to go away entirely.
Exactly. And he also mentioned so-called reciprocal concerns. That's usually when one side feels things aren't balanced, maybe pointing fingers at the other's rules or tariffs.
And he said something about fentanyl tariffs. That sounds different.
It does, doesn't it? Linking a trade tool to a massive public health crisis.
How does that work? Is it seen as like a legitimate health measure or more? Protectionist?
Well, that's the complexity, isn't it?
Hmm.
It could be framed as addressing a critical issue, but others might argue it's also a way to shield domestic industries.
Yeah.
It's got that duality.
Okay. So trade irritants are bucket number one. What's the second?
The second focus, he said, is much broader. It's about the future economic and security relationship between Canada and the U.S.
So looking beyond just the current squabbles to the long game.
Exactly. The overall health of that really vital partnership.
Now, thinking about how Canada is approaching this, the PM seemed pretty firm, said they'll fight to get the best deal for Canada.
Yep. Strong language. And he added they're willing to take all the time necessary, but not more.
Not more. What do you think that signals?
It sounds like strategic patience. We'll stick it out for the right deal, but we're not interested in just dragging our feet indefinitely. Purposeful negotiation.
He also mentioned kind of a parallel plan, strengthening ties with other trading partners, other allies.
Which is smart, right?
Yeah.
Diversification. It means you're not totally reliant on any one relationship, however important. Gives you a bit more leverage.
Like saying, we value the U.S. relationship, but we have other options.
Essentially, yes. It builds resilience.
And then there's that quote, Canada has what the world needs, and we uphold the values the world respects. It seems like a core part of their pitch.
It really does.
Yeah.
It positions Canada as more than just, dollars and cents. It highlights its global role, its values, trying to elevate the standing beyond just economics.
Okay, let's tackle the elephant in the room, that 51st state comment. The PM was asked about it directly.
Yeah, and this is really important. He stated very clearly that the president did not bring that up on their phone call.
Okay, that's a key clarification, because there have been public comments before, right? From the president or his team.
Absolutely. Around April 23rd, apparently, and on the campaign trail,
Mm-hmm.
those remarks definitely stirred things up.
Which is probably why the PM keeps stressing that respect for Canada, for its sovereignty, is fundamental.
Exactly. He made that point repeatedly. Respect is the baseline.
He was asked if he felt that respect was, evident lately. His answer seemed careful. Talked about want versus reality.
Yeah. What I took from that was his focus on the reality shown by Canadians themselves.
Meaning
Public opinion, election results. He basically said the Canadian people have made it overwhelmingly clear they don't want that. It's just not on the table.
he said it would never, ever happen. Pretty definitive.
Can't get much clearer, no. A very strong defense of Canada's separate identity.
And he framed the upcoming talks specifically as discussions between heads of our government about their partnership.
Right, reinforcing that idea of two distinct sovereign nations working together, not anything else.
So looking ahead to Tuesday, what should we actually Expect. He didn't exactly promise smooth sailing.
No, quite the opposite. He said expect it not to be easy, lots of zigzags, ups and downs.
Which sounds realistic for these kinds of talks, I guess.
Very realistic. These things are rarely straightforward, especially with complex issues and, well, maybe some differing public signals beforehand.
Yeah, that brings up the question of good faith. How did he respond when asked about whether these are really good faith negotiations, given some of the rhetoric?
His take was interesting. He pointed to the fact that the call itself was direct and constructive,
Okay.
and also the seniority of the people involved in the upcoming meeting.
Basically saying, look, the level of engagement, the president being directly involved, that suggests seriousness.
So action over just words, maybe?
That seems to be his interpretation, yes. That the direct engagement implies a genuine intent, even if the public messaging has been mixed.
But he also warned, very specifically, do not expect white smoke from this meeting.
Yeah, managing expectations there. Don't think this one meeting is going to solve everything, produce some grand agreement immediately.
So likely the start of a process, not the end.
That feels like the right way to look at it. More groundwork than grand finale. Okay, lastly, let's talk about Canada's position going in. The PM seemed to emphasize a particular kind of strength.
He did. He mentioned his belief that the president, being a negotiator himself,
Yeah.
respects strength.
So Canada needs to project that strength. How?
Well, a big part of it, according to the PM, seems to be focusing inward, on building Canada's own strength domestically.
What does that look like?
Things like building one Canadian economy, making sure infrastructure is up to scratch, boosting productivity, cutting waste, driving investment, basically getting Canada's own house in order.
It sounds almost like a message of self-reliance, like we can create our own prosperity.
Exactly. He
Mm.
essentially said Canada has more than enough to do here at home.
And that phrase, give ourselves more than the Americans can take away, that's quite pointed.
It is. It's a powerful statement of resilience. It suggests that whatever happens in these specific talks, Canada's destiny is ultimately in its own hands.
And it ties back to that point about taking the necessary time for negotiations.
Right, because if the focus is internal development, that continues regardless. They're saying we can afford to wait for the right deal because we're
Wow.
busy building our own strength anyway.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. The big meeting next week. It's about immediate trade issues, yes, but also the much bigger long-term Canada-US relationship, security included.
Right, and that 51st state idea, not raised on the call directly, according to the PM, but it's definitely hanging in the air as part of the context.
Canada's going in firm, aiming for the best deal, willing to take time, but also, crucially, focusing heavily on building its own economic strength at home.
So you, listening, should now have a clearer picture of the PM's stance, the key issues, maybe a better sense of the dynamics than just the headlines offer.
Definitely. So here's something to think about after we wrap. If Canada is really doubling down on this internal strength, maybe leveraging resources or tech or even its other global ties, how might that internal focus actually change the power dynamic with the U.S. down the road, regardless of what happens next Tuesday?